Welcome to Tech for Non-Techies, the podcast that explores the human face of emerging technology, demystifies data and provides insights into how tech shapes society and our everyday lives. I'm Karen Allen. I'm a former BBC News journalist hailing from a time when smart meant clever and intelligent, well, it meant smart. Now my job is to try to explain our brave new world through discussions with some of the brightest minds in the business, understanding the tech and its impact from a non-techie point of view. Today, we're meeting the data detectives, the men and women who crunch the numbers, analyse big data to give us incredible insights into the world in which we live, whether it's who's drinking which brand of coffee, to who's seeking to influence the stories we hear in whichever way we receive our news, locally, nationally and internationally. So without further ado, may I welcome Aldu, Cornelissen and Kyle Findlay, who together make up Murmur Intelligence. Morning, gents.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Karen. Nice to be here.
Good to see you guys. You work in the field of data analytics. I know that's not all you do, but just give us a sense, what does that mean? And why has it only really become a thing in the past 20 years? Kyle, that's one for you.
Yeah, data analytics, it's a very big label for anyone trying to derive value from data, I guess. And that could be someone working in a corporate, creating dashboards with charts and things for their internal clients, or a variety of things. Collectively, the whole area has emerged because we now have access to the data. Simple as that. Everything is measured. Everything is online. We live our lives online. And we leave breadcrumbs, we leave digital exhaust, we leave trails behind. And it's not just human lives. There's telemetry, which is the kind of stuff that systems and logistics and different parts of the global economy, those are all measured. They all leave traces behind. All that stuff is measurable in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago. So you throw all that stuff into a pot and you mix it around and you see what comes out of it, what patterns you can recognize, and that might help Amazon deliver a package faster. It might help understand the narratives that form echo chambers on social media, which is what we do.
Aldu, are you looking at patterns and relationships between people and relationships between things? And that's why you come up with these incredible dashboards and social network charts, which look like something out of a molecule chart that I remember back in my chemistry lessons at school.
Sure, yeah. So that's where I started my career. That's how I learned to code. Was I got interested in network theory, or to be specific, social network analysis back in the day. It's just one of many ways in which we can model human behavior. So we can model it by simple regression, for instance. It's an age-old trick to try to understand the...
And what do you mean by that?
We model the relationship between two variables. So if heat goes up, ice cream sales goes up. That's simple. It's an approximation, and with that approximation, we can learn quite a lot. So we understand the relationship between those two. Heat going up, ice cream sales going down, and we can also see heat going down, ice cream sales going down. We can also then project for unknown. If the heat is 100 degrees, what would the ice cream sales be? And social network analysis, or network theory, or graph theory, if you go to the mathematics of it all, is simply a way to model relationships between entities. And that's where those structures come from, because then we connect people, things, places. And if you have enough connections, you can understand quite a lot better about the unit. So, a profile online and a group of profiles. We can segment them. We can understand what's this group, what do they care about, who do they interact with, and so on. So that's why we do a lot of those fancy charts. It's essentially just a simple way to model interactions that gives us more information.
Let's put some flesh on the bone now. You've used data analytics to track political influence and so-called narrative control. What do you set out to look for?
When you look at any kind of social system, they're messy, they're noisy, they're highly emotive. People say things, politicians especially say things to get reactions, to get people to move in the direction they want them to move in, to imbibe the kind of ideas and narratives that they want them to imbibe. And social media in particular is super noisy, chaotic, and sometimes quite kind of overwhelming. So we try to avoid the trap of getting stuck in the anecdotal examples. Someone said this and someone said that, and instead we try to take a step back and look at what are the patterns, what are the broad shapes of behavior, the ways in which collectively things emerge and help to shape our perceptions. It's interesting to know that someone said, "Oh, Bill Gates is trying to take over the world, and vaccines aren't real," but you don't want to get caught up in that. Just one person saying that, you don't want to get caught in a situation where you now want to refute that or get in a one-on-one fight. That serves no one. What you want to do is you want to take a step back and you want to know, how often is this being discussed? Who is discussing it? Is it resonating with people? And only then make decisions on what's truly important, so that you don't get distracted by these kind of tactical pitch battles and focus on the broader effort instead. So we look for those broad patterns.
And interrupt you for a second. Is that also because, it's not just about the content, it's about how people receive the content, how the algorithm, the rules that determine what ends up in our feed are ranked in a particular way based on levels of activity and based on what's popular, not necessarily one person's view or another?
Yeah, absolutely. And you just don't want to be caught in a situation where you're reactive to everything all the time. You need to know what is worth reacting to and what is worth leaving. Which bulls do you hit and which bulls do you leave, And if you don't have that kind of bird's eye view, you're going to be chasing your tail all the time, reacting to everything. And oftentimes giving credence to the very things that you're trying to avoid. The famous, they call it giving the trolls oxygen, giving them oxygen to breathe by giving attention to things that otherwise would have gone under the radar. You're inadvertently actually giving them the end result that they asked for. So we try.
And this is the amplification, right? This is the idea that you're amplifying a particular narrative simply by maybe sharing it or focusing on it or just drawing attention, the oxygen of publicity, as you say.
Absolutely. So many times when people try to do things and manipulate people online, it just doesn't work. It fails. But what happens is that non-discerning actors react to that. And if that is a journalist who elevates that issue to a larger platform when it could have died in the dark of social media, where no one of importance would have reacted to it, then they've achieved their goal. So we try to take a step back and say, is this thing really a thing? Is this thing a manufactured thing? And when to react to it.
So let's take it away from the abstract and make it specific. You guys were involved in looking at the Guptas in South Africa. For those who are not aware of this story, this was a set of a family that was prominent in what was known as state capture, grand corruption, and they were able to run a very, very successful campaign linked through a number of websites claiming white monopoly capital. It's a complex story in South Africa, but effectively it was an information campaign and it was a coordinated campaign to try and push a racial narrative. Tell us where your discipline was able to help you.
So what it was we don't know exactly, maybe a dozen people based in India. We assume they're based in India because they worked Indian office hours. They used Indian-style apostrophes and separating thousands. We had all these kind of clues that implied that they were based in India. And how they came across researchers like myself, and there was several other people who all picked up on these signals at the same time. You had things like a unusual level of activity, a few accounts posting very strongly and also single-mindedly in terms of their content. And if you looked at things like when those accounts had been created, they'd all been created on the same day. They had no history. They had very weird portmanteau kind of South African names like Sipho van der Merwe that implied a lack of true understanding of how South Africans' names work, but at the surface level, it looked like someone had clearly tried to recreate South African names. And so it's not just one thing, it's a bunch of signals. And that's often the case in the work we do, is that it's not just one thing, it's a bunch of interacting red flags that lead you to start looking in one area or another area. And sometimes those flags could be raised in an automated fashion. Most of the time when we stumble across things, it's because we're looking at something else, and all of a sudden something sticks out in the data in an unusual way. And because we're looking at this data so often on a regular basis, it's very clear what normal looks like, and it's very clear what abnormal looks like. And oftentimes it's a gut feel. It's like, oh, there's something wrong there. That just doesn't look right. And then you have to kind of work backwards and figure out, like, why doesn't that look right? And so it's a mixture of data, analytics, intuition, art, and science.
For you, Aldu, what have been the big stories that have basically managed to surface globally courtesy of big data and analysing that big data? Are there particular ones that strike you?
It's a difficult question to answer. I sit in between politics and technology, and it's difficult to explain to people in politics how incredibly fast technology moves, especially in the last 2 years. So it's difficult to come up with a good example. I think my most recent interesting example was completely out of the blue, came from Anthropic. So Anthropic is the company that developed one of the big large language models called Claude. They detected people using Anthropic, or Claude in this case, to come up with false information, fake stories, propaganda, and so on. And they released the study to show that how they could block it, how they could guard against it. And I think that's for me the most interesting recent new novel use of technology to try to manipulate people, but then the platform being on top of it enough to preempt this and to investigate this and to release some information on how they blocked it, how they guarding against it in the future, and how others can guard against it as well.
Carl, I mean, my first exposure to this, I mentioned it at the top, was also some of the work that Bellingcat did, a very well-known organisation. It calls itself the Intelligence Bureau for the People. And it used a lot of these techniques. And there's been a lot of focus on Russian influence operations. They were particularly interested. They had a lot of people in their number who were very clever, able to analyse and sift through data. What have you learned, and what are the kinds of things that you are getting when you look at this particular issue?
I think social media is the new frontier of geopolitical influence. And I think most notable players have this capability on their radar. I think an early adopter of this was Russia. And I think they defined a lot of the methodologies that others have taken on to use since then. We obviously had the Internet Research Agency run by Prigozhin, who also ran the Wagner Group and died in that plane crash under mysterious circumstances. And now that group has been folded into the formal Russian army. So they definitely put a lot of credence in this area. There are a lot of others who, Graphica has done a lot of work on what China does in this space.
This is a commercial company that looks at data analytics, does the same kind of thing that you do, but possibly on a bigger scale.
Iran comes up a lot as well. There are an odd one or two examples from the US, but tend to be less prominent. Generally speaking, I can't think offhand of any coming from the EU or the UK. But so those are the main players. But as time goes by, everyone's kind of getting into the game. And it's not just nation states. And I think they kind of let the cat out of the bag. They kind of opened Pandora's box. But what has happened in Africa, and including in South Africa, is that average people have taken on these techniques. And particularly in Africa, it's kind of commodified this industry where it's pay for play, pay for influence. Anyone who's got the money can get their coordinated influence campaign run for them. And we see that across the African continent, and we see it in South Africa. And we see it at a really weird overlap between pop culture and politics. We have large, what I call mega influencers, and you can go to a mega influencer, you can message them through direct messages on the platforms they're on, you can get to them through influencer marketing agencies. There's a variety of ways you can get to these folks. And you could be a reality TV star, you could be a up-and-coming DJ, you could be a political movement, you could be a political party, you could be a nation-state actor. All of these people can go to these individuals who essentially run influence agencies, and they just do it covertly. So they don't advertise what they do, and when they do it, they don't tell you that they're doing it.
And that's the nub of it, isn't it? I wanted to interrupt and say, what's the difference between that and a PR company? What's the difference between that and a political advertising? Yeah. Because there'll be a lot of people who say, we get so worried about influence, but actually there's lots of people do it. The media does it. PR companies do it. Political advertisers do it. Why is it any different?
There's a big confusion when you say the word influencer, because when someone says influencer, you're thinking, oh, it's some fitness influencer on Instagram with 1 million followers who's doing a product placement. That's a different kind of influencer. And that's pretty fine, pretty normal. What we're talking about is covert influence where it is inauthentically coordinated without the knowledge of the audience that it is that is imbibing their content, that is the target of their content. So that's a very different.
Give me an example of what that looks like. What makes it covert? What makes it insidious in the way we receive that influence?
A recent example from the Daily Maverick here in South Africa was a campaign for Deputy President Paul Mashatile. I think it's Paul Mashatile Temba or something like that. And all of a sudden, there's this hashtag promoting Mashatile as a potential candidate or promoting his good work within the ANC, setting him up as for next president. The hashtag just appears out of nowhere overnight, and all of a sudden it's being used several thousand times in the space of a few hours in an effort to get that hashtag trending, in an effort to get other users who are not part of this covert campaign to bootstrap or to create something out of nothing, to create this campaign around this hashtag, to start using it, and hopefully it takes on a life of its own and becomes a legitimate hashtag around one of the ANC's running candidates. But to begin with, they try to create that out of nothing through using covert paid influencers, allegedly, seemingly. And that's the ways in which these kind of covert campaigns, maybe someone says something and it relates to their political party manifesto, a talking point that they are trading on in the upcoming elections. And several 100,000 users all start saying, oh, that's such a great idea. That's brilliant. And in different ways say the same thing, just out of nowhere, seemingly swarming this conversation to try and bring legitimacy to it, to raise the awareness of what's being said. That kind of coordinated, and we call it inauthentic coordinated activity, is the kind of covert influence we're talking about here.
And it's inauthentic, let me put this to Aldu, is because it doesn't emerge organically. It's not a conversation that's happening between lots of different people. It's effectively pushing a particular narrative, gaming the algorithm, and basically shaping the way we receive information. Is that right?
Yeah. If they use methods that people are, they're not aware that this person is being paid to say this, or they're using some technology to amplify something beyond what was normal, and make it seem like it is a true cause. And that's where the old astroturfing concept comes from, where it's fake grass. So it's a fake grassroots movement. It's very easy to create.
So let's hold on. Sorry to interrupt you, but that the example with that is, for example, I might be really, really interested in goldfish, and I might be on a group that talks about goldfish, and all of a sudden it pivots away to something else. And I get the impression there's a grassroots movement that's now focusing on oysters. And actually that may not be organic. That might be someone jumping onto our onto our particular group or onto our hashtag, and we don't necessarily pick it up. Is that right? Sorry to interrupt you, but just to clarify.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's a naturally seeming phenomenon that was artificially created. Whether it be a hashtag for some protest, whether it be changing the conversation in a group, all of those things are normally natural. So we expect protests, we expect hashtags, we expect the conversation to shift and wax and wane, but we don't want people to cause those shifts and those changes in societal narratives inauthentically. And that's where we try to come in. So we're trying to say, okay, so we're okay with this protest, but we're not okay with it being amplified inauthentically. And what does inauthentic mean here? And that's a tricky thing, and that's why we look at the data. So, for instance, you can very simple stuff. So someone sleeps. Generally, we recognize that people do sleep. So you can't expect someone to post 24/7, all right? It's not the best of signals because people can schedule tweets, right, or schedule posts. So it's not a great signal, but it helps at least. So now you're building up this arsenal of little breadcrumbs and little clues and data points that you want to orchestrate into this picture of, is this authentic, the way that the narrative shifted? Is this authentic, this particular protest, or the use of this hashtag? And then when we look at the data, we can tell you relatively certain the use of this hashtag was 100, or near 100% coordinated and bootstrapped using influencers or whatever. It's not natural. It's not a group of people that are passionate and are now suddenly talking about this hashtag 6 o'clock in the morning. And now it's in the trending list on Twitter, and now everyone's talking about it. One of the things we do is we look at, we call it buzzers. So we developed a buzzer calculation. And what we always need to tell people is that this calculation of an account being a buzzer can also mean that this person is just single-mindedly, absolutely infatuated with this topic and talks about nothing else in the world. Interact with no one else. They only interact with these key kind of celebrities, and they're only talking about this one thing.
You're listening to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast with me, Karen Allen. We're talking to Aldu Cornelissen and Kyle Findlay, the data detectives, whose job is to identify mischief making online. These buzzer accounts are kind of super amplifiers, are they? They basically only will talk to a particular cohort of people at a particular time, possibly, and they're focused, infatuated with a particular subject. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And if you expect people to be infatuated with a topic or a particular influencer, so that's not unexpected. But where it then becomes tricky is that if, let's say, a new narrative, a new issue, a new hashtag, new campaign, a new person trends, and it's almost exclusively those type of accounts, something's fishy. And then that's normally where we then highlight this and we send it off to what we call last milers, people then investigating the very specifics of, okay, let's just make sure that we understand who all these people are amplifying this. Let's do some OSINT work. OSINT meaning it's investigative journalism, but with technology, essentially.
Kyle, have you sat on aeroplanes and had people say to you, you're all about censorship because you're looking at inauthentic material? I mean, I've certainly had it, and I've only dipped my toe in this very, very gently. How do you strike that balance between, and how do you communicate that actually about what's authentic and what's inauthentic? Because everything feels so subjective nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough line to walk. And in recent years, terms like disinformation have completely become synonymous with censorship in certain political groupings. If you are a more right-wing, conservative-leaning in the global north, disinformation research is considered censorship. It's considered the silencing of voices that you don't agree with. And that's because of this subjectivity that's inherent in what we do. It's very difficult to know what the truth is, what is true. One person's perspective might be completely disagreed with by another person. And so the complaint is that researchers working on disinformation, who made them the arbiters of truth, that allow them to say, this is true, this is not, this is allowed to be broadcast and said, that is not allowed to be broadcast and said. And that's an epistemological problem. That's a problem for philosophers. It's an age-old problem. And so we try to avoid that problem. We try to avoid it by saying, this is not about disinformation research. This is just about propaganda. This is just about marketing. It's just about people putting their message out and using the tools available to them. And who's winning? Looking at the ebbs and flows, who's winning? And to Aldu's earlier comments, something might be inauthentic, but is that wrong? Well, marketing is inauthentic. If I am a big brand, if I'm McDonald's, I can put out a campaign and I can pay to have those adverts placed and targeted in a targeted way. That's inauthentic. But what's the difference there? The difference is there that me as the consumer, I know that it's inauthentic. It's true, there's the dark arts of marketing and you only know the surface level of the thought that's gone into it. But at some level, I know that this is a paid for message. So we believe that these kinds of covert influence industries are legitimate industries, that influencers have built up legitimate businesses over time and that they have a valuable skill set. We just think that to avoid the issue of who's right and who's wrong, what's truth, what's not, people should know when a message has been paid for, when a message has been artificially amplified, and allow them to choose whether or not they want to internalize it.
And full disclosure, we've got nothing against McDonald's, and that was just a random example. Just a final question, really, to each of you, and literally as quick as you can. We're talking about AI helping and also hindering in this whole world. Let's just look at it from a positive point of view. Surely, as AI gets more sophisticated, Aldu, it'll be easier to spot these patterns and possibly be able to spot inauthentic behavior.
The use of AI for us has been a phenomenal productivity tool. We have analysts at our fingertips, incredibly intelligent analysts. If you give them the correct information, they can help you quite a lot. So on that front, it's an incredible resource. I think we expected a lot more AI generated content, for instance, in the South African election than there was actually being used. I'm not so sure what the ultimate impact will be. If you can be better with your messaging, sure, exactly, but I don't think large language models will necessarily change the game from that point of view, and that might be a bit controversial to say. I think you can definitely be more productive with content generation.
Sorry, when you say productive, you could sort of produce some content and then distribute it in 50 different languages in a matter of seconds. A good example is I can go, if you give me a weekend, I can go replicate a lot of news sites and I can generate content for them with AI. If I have a good AI license and I pay for that, I can generate 10 websites, all with fake news and all sorts of stuff, hosted, looking quite legit. That's possibly problematic. And that can mildly terrifying, I would say.
Exactly. And that
mildly terrifying.
And that's I think it was a doppelganger effort that did that. They created fake variants of news sites. We had that in South Africa as well. So that's, from a technical point of view, that's possible. I can do it now. It's also easy to spot. So yes, you can be better at and more productive at content generation, tweets, websites, images. You're faster and more effective there, but you have to be good at it in the first place. If you, I think that's kind of what we see is that if you're bad at content generation to start off with, you're just producing more bad content.
with AI.
Can we not use AI to help us pick out some of this deceitful and deceptive way of pushing content our way?
We can. The problem is that AI is not very good at detecting AI. So unfortunately for universities, there's been quite a few attempts to prove that something has been written by AI, for instance. There's no real proper proof that you can detect that. So detecting AI-generated content by AI that's a maybe one day we'll get there, but currently we're not there. So it's not helpful on that end.
Carl, we're getting near to the end. I need to ask you, it's quite intense, what we've talked about. It feels quite abstract. How do you explain why this matters to your kids, to your neighbour, to your family?
Last time I got asked this question, I was accused of AI alarmism. So just to be clear, that I think we'll probably walk some middle path, but the worst case scenario that does keep me awake at night sometimes is just tearing apart the nature of our society. If I think about when I go to a social gathering these days, we're already walking on eggshells around certain topics. It's got to the point where I'm not even in America and I can't bring up American politics because I don't want to get upset with my neighbor. I like my neighbor. I don't want to find out that they hold diametrically opposite viewpoints to me and have to think about how I'm going to navigate that. And that's the reality that we're all facing, is that we're in WhatsApp groups with our neighbors. We're chatting to our family members, and through the use of this technology, what it's doing is it's just driving the level of rhetoric, the extreme nature of the positions. They just get more and more extreme and more heated. And it has this effect of crystallizing our views and caricaturing each other and driving us apart. To the point where we're not even living in the same world, where we're getting different pieces of information, different facts, and it's harder and harder for us to talk to each other. At a micro level, I see that playing out in my own personal life. And that feeds into our politics, the politics of the neighborhood, the politics of the schoolyard, or with parents at schools, and the politics of countries. And so technology is an accelerant on that. And it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. But what people do is we overweight the bad than the good. We're more worried about what we can lose than what we can gain. We're more receptive to things like fear and anger than joy and magnanimity. And so this technology knows that. And increasingly, there's the chance that AI knows how to manipulate us better and better and to push us into these groups and push us away from each other. And so that's the thing that I hope doesn't come to pass, that we can get a handle on this and before it rips the fabric of our society apart. That's to sound extreme and alarmist.
Aldu, I know you're nowhere are you more content than when you're with your laptop, because I know you've described yourself as an introvert and you're incredibly smart guy. But stepping away from your laptop for a moment when you're out in the world, mixing with people and going to the shops and mixing with your family, what worries you?
I think what really worries me is the loss of the, let's call it the town square, the degradation in the quality and the role it plays in society. So to make that more real is that my own family would watch podcast or listen to podcasts and watch YouTube channels that I know through our research is very, very problematic. Not in necessarily just the content, but the way in which that content gets generated and funded and pushed. And I think it has to do with media and journalism is losing a bit of a battle to keep a central ground, to keep that town square anchored in reality and good interpretations. And I think that keeps me awake.
That's the kind of social cohesion that people talk about. Obviously, questions about what the big platform owners need to do. We're going to have to look at that at a separate podcast. But time for me to wrap up. Kyle and Aldu together, Murmur Intelligence, thank you very much. If you like the Tech for Non-Techies podcast, please do share it and look out for more from us. This has been a Karen Allen International production, sound provided by One Big Room Studios. Bye for now.